Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Counterpoint podcast. The COVID 19 effects are getting quite severe than what was expected, and it has caused a lot of disruption across different businesses and sectors. And while most of us are working from home, the manufacturing sector has been heavily impacted. And to talk about the same, I am joined by our Associate Director, Tarun. Hi, Tarun. How are you doing?
Hey Ritesh, I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good too. Just that the work from home bit is something that getting used to it.
We are getting used to it, right? I think it will be a all different way of working after COVID-19. So, yeah,
Great. So let's talk about today's topic. I would first want to know about the current update on the India manufacturing scenario.
right. So, Ritesh, as you know, like we have been tracking India manufacturing for over 6 years now closely. One thing, what has impacted India manufacturing from a more serious front is like the people who are involved there, right? We have almost 100 plus manufacturing factories of handsets currently in India, and roughly if you put aside a number that translates into almost 120, 130,000 of workers who are directly or indirectly employed here in this particular sector. Now, as you all know, that mobiles are not currently under the essential list of goods, so potentially all this activity around these devices had come to a standstill, which means nothing is happening, the factories are closed, and that has impacted significantly on the sector. On an average, you can see like in India, almost 7 to 800k of mobile phones are being produced daily, are being manufactured daily. So effectively that has come down to zero. So that has a huge impact on the overall segment. We are estimating somewhere close to 3 to 4 billion of impact currently on the Indian manufacturing, and that does not include the indirect impact, which means the moment the COVID-19 situation is back to normal, all these things will not be back from day one. It will be like a phased approach. The phased, you can say, in certain locations, the situation might still be severe, so factories in those locations might be closed, while some of the locations the factory starts running. So it's quite gloomy out there. But then we had some of other indications what we are picking up, which are on a positive note, so we can discuss this over a period during this particular podcast. So that's the overall number which is coming out of it as of now, Ritesh.
And which companies are heavily affected?
So companies, as you know, right, India manufacturing, we have almost 100 plus units. We have all the major OEMs right now in India, which are doing assembling in India. So you can say that all the OEMs are impacted. First, because they have their assembling operations in India, and then India still do not have majority of the component players. But still, if you look at the players in the chargers, the packaging, the cables, the mechanics side of it are being impacted as of now. So talking about the OEMs, we have players like Samsung, Xiaomi, Oppo, Vivo, who predominantly do a huge volume out of it. And the reason I said Samsung at the first place, because that's the only player which is not doing domestic assembly, but a bulk of it is also going outside India. So both the exports and the domestic consumption has been impacted right now in India.
What is the impact on exports? Like, is it only Samsung who is exporting, or there are other companies also that are exporting?
There are other companies too. So if you look at the India's export on an average was increasing year on year. So for example, if you look at 2017, we had just 3 million units of exports, handset exports. happened. But fast forward to 2019, the number increased by almost 13 times. A bulk of it was Samsung, you can say 90% of or so, but there are other companies as well which have started exports. You have Lava, the local player, which has been exporting a bit. We have seen a bit of exports from Apple too. And the other companies were also contemplating, like the Xiaomi's and the Oppos of the world, to look at some of the export destination. And the timing was right, because if you look at some of the leading players in India, they are also expanding their locations outside to the different countries in Europe, to Southeast Asia, to Middle East Africa. So yes, and last year we had a good run in terms of export, obviously driven by Samsung, and this year we projected it to almost be double than last year. But I think we might end up at almost the similar number uh, after this COVID impact for 2020.
And do you think more companies will look at India as a part of their global manufacturing ambitions post the COVID 19?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it's a tricky one also, because if you look at globally, there are roughly around seven manufacturing zones. We can say, like, you have country like China, a bulk of it, almost 60%. Then you have countries like Vietnam who are doing really good. India, emerging one. You have Indonesia. You have handset manufacturing happening in Latin America and like Brazil. Middle East a bit, in bits and pieces for certain OEMs like Transsion or so. But when we talk about the overall handset manufacturing, the discussion always limits to few countries, and here it is always around China, India, and Vietnam. I think if companies will start to diversify after COVID 19, there will be two countries which will emerge as a very, very potential alternatives, and one of them will be India for sure. So it will be like India and Vietnam. Now, the challenge with both these countries is they have their share of challenges, in a sense. Like if you look at Vietnam, they have a lot of things going in their favor, like the lower trade tariffs, which are going in favor of Vietnam as of now. As you know, that they have signed around a dozen free trade pacts with a lot of countries, and that works in favor of Vietnam. If you look at other possible things which work in favor of Vietnam, are like lower corporate income tax. They have very mature industrial zones, and obviously the facilities in those industrial zones are very, very good. In fact, if you look at their labor part of it, they have been there for decades in Vietnam. So that works in their favor. But with every advantages, there are certain disadvantages also. So for example, if we talk about Vietnam, the land prices are soaring. They are relying on China for components a lot. And if you look at the domestic consumption is limited, right? It's majority of it is for export. But if you look at India as an alternative, the biggest advantage what India gives you is huge domestic consumption. You are not you will not just get the economies of scale for domestic consumption, but then you will end up doing exports. So I think government has realized this part of it. We have seen some improvements in the corporate tax last year. Now the production line incentive, there will be incentive related to exports also. And um, and if you look at right now, the companies who are doing really good have huge scale. And Counterpoint, as a research agency, we have always been of this opinion that you don't need to attract all the players in the ecosystem. What you need to really do is look for the anchor companies, and the adjoining ecosystem will start falling in place. So if the big brands are here already, you don't need to worry about, because these things do not happen overnight. The value addition will happen over a period of years, like 4 or 5 years down the line. But the good thing is we have some big names who are willing to invest, who have a huge domestic market. Like if I talk about OEMs, like uh, Xiaomi is doing a great job on that in terms of their manufacturing. Vivo, Oppo, Samsung, these four big players are doing a very good job on manufacturing. And even the local players like Lava, they come with a very, very deep expertise in the manufacturing, and they can serve as an EMS to a lot of other players. And when we look into the other side of it, which means the EMS side of it. So you have Foxconn already there, you have Flextronics already here. So big names are already there. Now the second step is, we have assembling big players who are already there, but assembling is only 5% of the value addition. What about the rest? Like the components, right? So that is the next test of India as a market. And I think we have, with the phase manufacturing program, which was started in 2016-17, and in fact, we have done a study with IIM Bangalore at that time, looking into the phased manufacturing and its subsequent impact. So we have come a lot. We have covered a lot of ground since then. So, for example, 1617 is uh, the overall duty on the charger increased, battery, wired headsets, and then we increase the duty on other components like mechanics, like the PCBs, and we have come a long way. Right now, the next step, what we think is, we need to look beyond duties. Right, duties will bring you to a certain level, but from here onwards, I think it will be a collaborative push from the government and the companies, depending upon the what incentives you are giving to these companies to scale uh, in India for the world. So that will be a very interesting piece to see from here onwards.
Right, got it. And once these dark clouds over COVID-19 are clear, how long will it take for manufacturing to return in full swing?
I think again, it depends upon demand, and in handset as a segment, we think the demand is resilient. But having said that, I think it will take another 5 to 6 months for the industry to get back to normal. And by normal, I mean like when things are full in full capacity in terms of like manufacturing output. You might start with somewhat called a phased one. So because we also need to note, like a lot of a comparison here is being done with China. Like the China, the capacity, the output came within a month, right, to 100%. But in China, there is a lot of automation in their factories. And in India, when we talk about handsets, the automation is still not there. So you might see something like you because you still need certain level of people to drive a particular assembly line. So I think it can be somewhere like 25% obviously to start with, and then reaching to 50%, 70, and 100. But each ramp up will take almost like 2 to 3 weeks. So that is the desired uh, time frame what we are looking at. Maybe 4 or 5 months should be good enough. Another thing which works in favor right now for a lot of these companies is, uh, we have almost 240 assembly lines in India. That's the roughly I'm talking about, and not all the lines are running at full capacity, right? Which means in India we can leverage exports as an opportunity once the COVID-19 is over, and we can use these uh, lines which are now idle and use these lines to serve for the export demand which will come after COVID-19. So potentially we are hitting two things with one particular. We will Companies can ramp up their production lines, and by doing so, they will also give employment to hundreds of people, because on an average, if you look at one line, you have like 40, 50 people working on that. And imagine if we add 50 more lines looking at the exports angle, we might end up giving a lot of employment to the people who are who are like right now might get unemployed after this COVID-19 or so. So this industry can still look at like hiring more people once this is over. And mind you, we just need to look at from the handsets as an opportunity, because there are others. You can see product segments as well, where India can chip in, and companies can leverage. We are talking just about handsets, but if you look at the demand coming from TVs, laptops, you have smart wearables which are growing very fast in India, set-top boxes, smart speakers, and this is not just for India. I'm talking about making it for the world. So yeah, we can open up a lot of avenues for the companies after COVID-19.
Great. So, moving away from manufacturing, what are your thoughts on supply and demand impact after COVID 19?
On the general handset space, I think supply, we as an industry are still sitting at like 4 to 5 weeks of inventory. That should be good enough to start with once the demand is back. Supply should not be a major challenge here. I think demand is something which every OEM will need to rework their strategy and see, okay, how they can cater to, because it's not just the demand versus supply misbalance. It will also be a channel misbalance, because what will happen, how people will buy phones after COVID-19, like we initiated our discussion, like a lot will change after COVID-19. So the consumer overall sentiment might not be back at 100%. So you can see a lot of consumer might rely on online as a preferred channel to buy devices after the lockdown is over or once the situation is normal. So I think the demand will be a tricky thing to keep an eye on rather than the supply. From demand perspective, what we need to do is we need to obviously look at the different price tiers, the different even the installed base. What we always believe that the installed base of any given nation gives a very good picture of what's the demand going to be like. So what we think is, it all depends upon how much of economic impact there is going to be after COVID-19. But we believe that mobiles being an absolute necessity, people are going to spend to purchase devices. Although there might be an opportunity loss in terms of, like, if someone is going to buy a 40K device, they might still go for 30K or even at a lesser value, but the volume will not face a big decline. So we have revised our estimates. So as per the Counterpoint Research latest estimates, which are keeping into view the lockdown 2.0, we are estimating almost like 143 million smartphones being sold this year, as against 158 million last year. But the good thing, like I said, is Q3 and Q4 will be very crucial, because uh, we have festive season which is there in November, and if things are back to normal by, let's say, July or August, we still have the full September, October, and November to make up for the lost demand in the April and May and June time period.
And with this kind of economic scenario and crisis that revolves around COVID 19. Which segment may be affected the most?
I think the entry level, the sub 5K will be impacted the most. And the reason is a lot of users in this segment have less purchasing power. And they are likely to be impacted because they are going to save their money for absolute essential, like, and for them it might not be smartphone in that order. So like the food, the other essentials, the medicines might be more priority. Other than that, what we are looking, if you look at if you divide the overall India handset market in different price tier, like you have the entry level, you have mid tier, you have the high tier, and obviously that's a very general split of the market. And within high tier, high end, you can say that we have ultra premium or so, but largely we believe that premium market, which is like 30K and above, might not be impacted that much. um, as definitely, as you can understand, the consumers in those segment will still buy no matter what happens. But what, like I said, what will happen, the sweet spot will continue to be 10 to 15K. And consumers, what they will do, instead of like spending more, they might hold on to their purchase and might end up spending on the same level of purchase like what they have purchased 2 years back or whatever their previous purchase is. So the overall ASP will take a hit. The overall average selling price of India market was increasing at 18% year on year. That will take an hit, and what we believe that 10 to 15 will still remain a sweet spot in the India market, while less than 10K will take an impact. 30 greater than 30 will remain as it is, and the next segment that can take an impact will be uh, 20 to 30K segment, because and that's a very tricky segment, and we do not have much competition over there. So the consumers might hold on to a, a particular price tier which is one less, because the kind of launches we have in India at that particular price tier is still very very aggressive, and we assume the kind of visibility what counterpoint research is picking up from the component sourcing and what is happening in China, we might see an aggressive portfolio in 10 to 15K that will continue to remain. So consumer might go for like 10 to 15 and might not spend more. And this is assuming there will be an economic impact on the overall market. So yeah, if I have to summarize this, I can say that the handset is one category which is very resilient, although it might be looking very gloomy right now. But once the things are getting back to normal, once things are normal, it will all come down very very sharply also in it might not be an exact V-shaped curve, but a slightly longish U shape or so. But the good thing is we still have festive season to back off the lost demand what we had in Q2 or so.
Before we come to the conclusion of this podcast, I have one last question. Uh, when it comes to online versus offline, which channel will likely take a major hit?
Um, I think if you look at major hit, obviously it will be offline, going by the trends and the sentiments. Like I said, the consumer will still find online in a better shape. They would not like to go out, but that also means an opportunity for the offline retailers, because, like we said, the way of working will change after COVID-19. So you might see a retailer, let's say in tier 3 or tier 4 city, starting something like, okay, I can send you a device home delivered. So you can have a very local model emerging in different cities, where the whole discussion on buying a phone changes drastically. Definitely online, I'll go that they will have, because even when the things are getting back to normal, the nature of the channel is like that they can get things uh, to the they can actually circulate things very quickly. So by the nature of online channel makes it a lucrative bet right now. But having said that, for the OEMs who are looking at India from the longer term perspective, this is the time to support offline players, because if they do that right now, that loyalty will go in a very very long term. So having said that, I won't be surprised if the second half of 2020 the number will be even for online versus offline, like 50 and 50 across this channel.
Well, thank you, Tarun, for your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Sitesh. Thanks for your time, and yeah, stay safe.
And I would also like to thank our listeners for tuning in. I hope all of you are staying home and healthy. We are present on multiple podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, among others, where you can go and listen to our previous episodes. So, thank you for tuning in.